Welcome to SLP Nerdcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Amy, and we appreciate you tuning in. In our podcast, we will review and provide commentary on resources, literature, and discussed issues related to the field of speech-language pathology.
You can use this podcast for Asha professional development. For more information about us and certification maintenance hours, go to our website, www.slpnerdcast.com. SLP Nerdcast is brought to you in part by listeners like you. You can support our work by going to our website or social media pages and contributing. You can also find permanent products, notes, and other handouts, including a handout for this episode. Some items are free, others are not, but everything is always affordable. Visit our website, www.slpnerdcast.com, to submit a call for papers to come on the show and present with us. Contact us anytime on Facebook, Instagram, or at info@slpnerdcast.com. We love hearing from our listeners, and we can't wait to learn what you have to teach us.
Just a quick disclaimer, the contents of this episode are not meant to replace clinical advice. SLP Nerdcast, its hosts, and its guests do not represent or endorse specific products or procedures mentioned during our episodes unless otherwise stated. We are not PhDs, but we do research our material. We do our best to provide a thorough review and fair representation of each topic that we tackle. That being said, it is always likely that there is an article we've missed or another perspective that isn't shared. If you have something to add to the conversation, please email us. We would love to hear from you.
Before we get started in today's episodes, financial and non-financial disclosures, I am the owner and founder of Grand Bois Therapy and Consulting, LLC, and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. Amy Wonka is an employee of a public school system and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. We're both members of ASHA SIG 12 and both serve on the AAC Advisory Group for Massachusetts Advocates for Children. I am a member of the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy, Mass ABA, the Association for Behavior Analysis International, and the corresponding Speech-Language Pathology and Applied Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group. Hooray. So glad that's over. Moving on.
Yes.
So we are talking about legal and accounting considerations in private practice today. We decided to do this topic because it's a question that I get quite often.
It also seems really overwhelming and scary for some people. I am one of those people. There are a lot of moving parts to private practice, and we didn't learn any of this in grad school. At least I didn't learn any of this. Kate, did you have any business?
No, I had absolutely no business training or accounting training. I mean, I went to speech school and BCBA school. I didn't get any of this training at all. And I think, but I will say that when I was a graduate student, I think there was always a draw to private practice, or it was always something that was like, oh, maybe one day you could be in private practice. There's something very, I think, enticing about it for a lot of people because it's this mysterious sort of, I don't know how to do that. And I have owned a private practice for about 10 years now. And I have made about a bajillion mistakes, and I've done it 1,000 different ways. I've taken insurance, I've done private pay, I have one employee, sort of ish. So sort of learning about all the business background relating to private practice has been a long and interesting journey, put it that way. But I think you're right. There's a lot of concern out there and worry about liability, and all those things. As a matter of fact, a little story, one of the reasons that I got more deeply into my private practice was because I was having lunch with an attorney friend of mine. Shout out to you, TN out in Seattle. And she was asking me all of these questions about my practice and what kind of clients I had. And she very casually was like, so do you think any of your clients would ever like put something in their mouth or swallow it while you were working with them? And I was like, oh, totally. Because I work with, more severe students and clients. That's always been my area. And as an attorney, she was like, oh, well, you absolutely need, this, and you need this, and you need this, because what I've learned is attorneys sort of set you up to prepared for your doomsday worst case scenario. So through that experience and through a lot of way too many hours with attorneys and accountants, I have sort of come to this bank of knowledge that I am hoping to impart into our listeners today.
Well, and I think we're recording this in March of 2020. We're not sitting next to each other in a room like we
This is our
usually
first
are.
distance recording.
Yeah. And so it's a tough time. It's a weird time out there where a lot of us are, minimizing or, really eliminating our social contact with other people. And that has a lot of implications for folks in the field.
It has a lot of
What do you-
implications for employment. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of
Yeah.
people out there who have um, very different incomes, very different professional experiences with a lot of unknowns. And I think I can speak for both of us where there's a lot of people interested in starting private practice through distance learning, and all of those kinds of things. So there's we both have a lot of friends and colleagues whose employment is being affected by this. And there are a lot of people out there interested in starting private practice using modalities of technology and telepractice. So hopefully this will be a nice piggyback onto, or at least will be helpful information to people out there trying to take on a private client or two, having never done it before. Our episode today is going to be broken up into 3 different parts. So first, we're going to talk about legal implications. So what are the legal considerations and responsibilities of owning and running a private practice? We'll go through a few different components related to that. Second, we're going to talk about accounting. What are the accounting considerations and strategies involved in owning and running a private practice? So when I say accounting, I mean budget planning, considering what expenses you need to take on, considering how you plan for your income throughout the year. And I have spent way too many hours with my accountant, who is lovely.
And that's also, the taxes are different too. So
Yes,
as somebody,
taxes.
somebody who's paid as an employee, your employer kind of takes care of all of that. But when you're running your own business, that's
Yes.
different.
How could I forget taxes? That was on purpose. I must have blocked it out. Taxes are horrible. But yes, one of the biggest things we're going to talk about today is taxes. Oh, thanks, Aim. And the last bucket that we're going to talk about today is revenue and income. So should you take health insurance? How do you set up your private practice to take health insurance? What are other revenue options that you have? And so those are the three main points that we are going to go over. And as we already discussed, I get questions related to this all the time. So if at any point through this episode there is a question that you still have, please feel free to email me and reach out to me. There's a lot of topics I don't like to talk about, but actually I find this really interesting. So please feel free to reach out anytime. First, legal. So as I already mentioned, attorneys really exist to help prepare you for your worst case scenario. Yes.
And this to me is
She's
one
waving her hand at me through the screen.
we're trying really hard to get our remote podcasting flow down.
It's working.
Normally, yeah,
It's working.
We're getting there.
We're
Getting there.
doing a good job.
This is the scariest part for me, the legal piece. Like, what are all the
yeah.
pieces that I need to think about and plan for? And I don't even have, a rubric in my mind for all of those different components. Like, I think of liability insurance, but beyond that.
Well, right. And I mean, based on the little vignette that I told my friend, she was like, well, would one of your clients ever swallow something or, accidentally do something dangerous? I was like, oh, totally. They do dangerous stuff all the time. I mean, how many times in your work setting have you seen something that made you a little uncomfortable or had a question like, not sure if I'm able to do this. And then you go ask your administration. But what if there is no administration, right? Like, who do you turn to? And attorneys are expensive. So there are a handful of things that you can do to protect yourself without an attorney. And I'm going to go through and list some of those things. And I think the first thing to consider is mitigating your risk. So considering how at risk are you of being sued? And I think there are a couple of factors that go into that. So first and foremost, what kind of clients are you seeing? So if you're a speech pathologist who is in private practice and you have an accent modification practice and you're working with neurotypical adults who are at very low risk for injuring themselves, then you would probably have less risk than someone who is feeding. And we had a whole discussion yesterday about feeding and swallowing, about a feeding and swallowing case where they're at risk for aspiration and possible loss of life, right? Like there's a huge spectrum there between how much risk you actually have. So, thinking about what level of protection that you want is really rooted in how much risk you think you are, how at risk you actually are.
And does that also change depending upon, like, I know you used to have an office, like you had an office that you were maintaining and clients were coming to your office.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've also worked in places where you've contracted out and kind of worked in some other environment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a variable there?
That is a variable, and I don't know a ton about that. But you have certain different kinds of. There's all kinds of insurance. Everyone out there can probably hear my children screaming in the background as we all work from home. So apologies, but there are different kinds of insurance that you can get. There is employment liability insurance. There is or like workers' comp related insurance. There's your malpractice insurance. I believe there are some umbrellas of malpractice insurance that would cover injury. Like if you have a private practice brick and mortar and there's ice and someone slips in your office and hurts themselves. I would definitely, when you get malpractice insurance, I would definitely look into some of those things. That's a really good question. There's also cyber insurance, so that you can get an insurance. If you store all of your documentation electronically, you can purchase cyber insurance to make sure if you get hacked, your information is, is going to be protected in some encrypted military grade situation.
Well, and that was sort of when I tapped out of doing any form of private practice in the past, in the dinosaur ages, before all the web-based features and
It's changed
HIPAA.
so much in like 5 years.
Right. And so when that happened for me, I felt like then it became too many variables to keep track of. Like I got the liability insurance through Asha back in the day, and they ask you a lot of different questions. And at that time I did a very small amount of private practice, and it was typically, going into somebody's home for a limited time basis. And the rules around records and all of that have changed so much that I felt like I can't keep on top of it and do a good job with it. So I'm just not going to do it.
And I think this comes back to volume. I mean, if you're a clinician who wants to pick up one client, then the amount of protection you feel like you need is totally different than managing documentation for, 20 clients.
But
You know what
on
I'm
the
saying?
flip side, there have been changes too. Way back in the day when I was doing that type of service, there weren't products out there that were designed to help with that flow too. I mean, I don't know what you use for your tracking, but there are web-based platforms that you can subscribe to.
Practice software. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of that. And I have we're going to go over different kinds of record keeping and HIPAA compliance and that kind of stuff a little bit later. But sort of looping back to the different kinds of protection and consideration for how you want to protect yourself. So there is the malpractice insurance that has different levels of insurance. So it's a different cost if you're a single provider, so just Amy going out and seeing one client. But if you decide to incorporate or become an LLC, then you have a different level of coverage because you're considered a group. So there's a bunch of different resources on our website for the different kinds of malpractice insurance that you can get. And I'll just list 3 of them quickly. One is the Asha Affinity member benefit that you have to sign into the Asha webpage to see it. One is called Mercer Consumer, which was formerly Marsh, and I think that's a really popular one. I personally use Healthcare Providers Services Organization, HPSO for short, and all 3 of those links are going to be listed on the episode page. The costs vary significantly in terms of which plan you choose. And like I said, the cheaper, if you're just one person, it's like $100 a year. But if you're an LLC or incorporated and considered a group, it can be upwards of $650 a year, which is something, again, to consider for your budget. In terms of incorporation, now that we've sort of opened that can of worms, incorporating yourself as a business is I'd say the highest level of protection you can get. Oh, and I should have said, shame on me for not saying this at the very beginning. Massive disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I am not an accountant. So I'm about to spew all of this like advice related to legal issues and accounting issues. But you listeners out there, you should find your local professionals. You should find your local attorney or a friend you knew in college who's now an attorney, or use the resources around you to get actual legal and accounting advice. This is not that. This is my experience and what I have learned, and hopefully a handful of people out there find it helpful. So shame on me. I should have said that at the beginning. But moving on. So incorporating your business is one of the higher levels of protection that you can get. And let's say, for the sake of example, that little Johnny puts a marble in his mouth and he swallows it, and something terrible happens because he has swallowed this marble and he was playing with you when it happened, and the parents sue you as a clinician. This is what an attorney is going to say to you. They're going to set you up for the worst case scenario. So what do you do?
This is terrifying.
It's terrifying, but this is why a lot of people don't go into private practice, I think.
Yes.
So in a court of my understanding, I am not an attorney, disclaimer. My understanding is that in a court of law, you would need to prove that you and your business are separate entities. And if it's just Amy and not Amy Incorporated, there is no difference between you and your company. And that's called the court, the person suing you would be trying to prove that Amy, the person, and Amy, the incorporated business, are the exact same person. It's called piercing the corporate veil.
That sounds very formal.
Somebody can Google that. So they would be trying to pierce the corporate veil. So let's say that you were incorporated and you had an LLC and you got sued. That's your company getting sued, not Amy, the person, getting sued. So in order to take your house or come after you for something, they would have to prove in court that there's no difference between you and a business. So if you're not incorporated, you have none of that protection. In other words, incorporating your business separates you from your business. So somebody would have a very hard time, one additional layer of protection to prove that you and your business were the same thing.
So I know that you're not a lawyer, so you might not know the answer to this.
Did I say that already? I am not an attorney.
You mentioned that, Kate, not a lawyer. Amy,
I'm not a lawyer.
Definitely not a lawyer. So what's the difference between, if you know it, between an LLC, which is what you are, right?
I am an LLC, yes.
What about like a DBA?
So yes, we will get to that. So DBA is actually not incorporated. DBA stands for doing business as. And I will skip ahead since you asked about that, but I got to find my notes. So a DBA it varies by state, and in most states it's just a certificate. So you register your business name. It's like in Massachusetts where we are, it's $65 for a filing fee. You renew it every couple of years and it protects your name, but you don't get any additional legal protection. So if there's another Amy Wonka out there who wanting to do speech pathology and you're doing business as Amy Wonka, that person, I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Ask your attorney or Google it and send me the feedback if I've said this wrong. But so a DBA doesn't give you any additional legal protection because it's not incorporated. It's not an incorporated entity. So the levels of incorporated entity are LLC. In some states, it's PLLC, which stands for Professional Limited Liability Company, and that goes through the state professional licensure. I used to be a PLLC, now I'm an LLC. There's almost no legal difference between the two, and there's no accounting difference between the two. So it's just what government body is your incorporation going through, and that varies completely by state. So some states have PLLC, some don't. There's S Corp, there's C Corp, there's incorporation, there's being incorporated. Each one of these entities has different tax liability. So yes, she's raising her hand at me again. Sorry. Yes, Amy. What would you like to say?
I was wondering, so if you're thinking about going into private practice and you're trying to figure out, and you say, okay, like this is what I would do if I were to do it. I would say, I'm a very risk averse person. So I would like the idea of this incorporating thing. That sounds good to me. Is that a question for your attorney? Is that a question you ask your accountant? Do you talk to both of them about it? Like, how did you arrive at your decision?
I would talk to both of them. So because they have different, tax implications, the questions my accountant would ask me, she knows what tax bracket I'm in. She knows that I'm filing jointly with my husband. It's pass-through taxes. So there are every person brings a different set of variables to the table in terms of their tax package. So I would definitely talk to your accountant about it. But also I would talk to an attorney about it as well, because there are different equity components to it. So for example, there is a single member LLC, and then there's a multi-member LLC. And a single member LLC, which is what I am, I'm a practice owner. I don't have any partners. But if I incorporated as a multi-member LLC, then I could take on a partnership, in which case myself and another person jointly own the business at different percentages and are jointly responsible for the business and have a joint investment in the business, and then get, we can draw money out of the business based on our percentage of ownership. And those are all legal issues based on, if you have a partner that you want to go into business with, a multi-member LLC might make more or less sense than an S Corp, depending on the different variables. I don't know much about S Corps and C Corps because I have been incorporated as a PLLC, an LLC, and an Inc. in the various different businesses that I have owned and run over the years. So I know more about those, but I would definitely, to answer your question, accountants and attorneys basically rule the world here, and they both have different things to offer. So the major advantage of incorporating your business is this additional level of protection. It is basically the highest level of protection from a lawsuit, but there are some disadvantages too, which sort of goes back to what your professional goals are. If you want to, it's one thing to take one or two private clients versus wanting to open an entire clinic and have employees. The disadvantages are that it's really expensive to set up. So if you do it properly, it costs about $3,000 to do it through an attorney. I know it's not cheap. And so that might be worth the investment if you have these grand plans of having a brick and mortar and, having a volume of, 150 clients and a whole bunch of different employees. You have to pay the $3,000 to have the attorney draft up the paperwork. And then you also have to pay annual fees to the state. That also varies by state. So this is an additional budgetary concern / consideration.
Silly question.
There's no such thing as a silly question. This is very dry, but I get really into this. So I'm sorry. I appreciate your questions.
When you file an LLC paperwork, is that also with your state?
Yes.
And as an SLP,
it's all with your state.
So we're in the Northeast, and our states are geographically kind of tiny and close to one another. If you file in one state, could you do business in a different state? The
only reason you couldn't do business in a different state is if you're not licensed.
Okay.
But we're right next to New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. I could practice in New Hampshire if I had a New Hampshire speech and language pathology license.
So you don't need your LLC to be set up also in New Hampshire.
I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. I've never done business in a different state. So I know that there are tax considerations for that. You need to register your business in the town where it exists. So you probably have to register with the state, and that's probably a small fee. Like I know in the town where I am, registering your business is it's like $30 or $50 or something, and it lasts a couple of years. So I think you have to register, but you don't have to reincorporate. I'm pretty sure you don't have to pay like the, rate, but that could vary state by state too. So I would definitely check no matter where you are, no matter what state you're in, no matter where you plan to do business, I would always check with the Secretary of State's website or check with the state government to make sure that you're in compliance, because every state does it differently.
And your attorney might have that information too, right?
Right.
If you want. Yeah.
Right.
But as we've mentioned, attorneys are.
Right. So what an attorney does is they draft up articles of incorporation, which has all this legal jargon in it. And we won't get too into that, but you could also do it through LegalZoom. LegalZoom will, like an attorney
What's
will, LegalZoom.com. I'm like their commercial. So when you go to an attorney, they will talk to you about your business goals and they'll draft up these very complicated articles of incorporation that are specific to you and exactly what you're doing. When you go through LegalZoom, they'll ask you some like general questions and they give you a boilerplate articles of incorporation and they do it for you. It's like a third of the price. Last time I checked, it was like $1,000. So it's much, much cheaper. But if you were to get sued, it's not going to stand up as well in a court of law. So all roots back to what your goals are and what your level of comfort is. I mean, some people are like, well, I don't really care. Nobody's going to sue me. I'm doing X, Y, and Z with one person. DBA sounds great. I'm all set. Versus somebody who is, again, this brick and mortar with a much larger, setup with a lot more volume.
So if I were thinking of this, just the way that my brain works, I would take a sheet of paper and make 2 boxes. And for each of these areas that we're going through, I would kind of keep a running pros and cons list for myself to kind of figure out where I would shake out in this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You talked about the pros of incorporation versus not.
So in short, incorporating is your maximum level of protection. It has a lot of disadvantages. It's expensive to set up. It's expensive to maintain because you have to pay fees with the state to stay registered. And when you incorporate, you become a group, which means that your malpractice insurance is much more expensive. So I think the biggest disadvantage is that it's much more expensive. And your personal situation, you may have been saving for this and you want to invest all of this additional time and money into setting something up. So at the bare minimum, let's say that you have one client and you don't want to do any of this and you're just going to register at doing business as. If you were to get sued in a court of law, you would still need to prove that you as a person are different than you as a business. And the biggest way to do that is to keep your money separate. So
It feels like a segue into accounting.
It does. You could smell it a million miles away.
I could. I'm not even near you.
So at the very, very least, keep your money separate. So if you do a DBA, you go to the bank, you open a business checking account, and every single dollar that you get paid working as a speech pathologist gets deposited into that business checking account, and then you pay yourself as a person out of that business checking account. So if you were to get into a court of law and they were to say, there's no difference between Amy the person and Amy the business, you could say, oh, yes, there is. I haven't used any of that money. All of my business money is separate.
And you could do that even if you aren't taking the step to do a DBA. If you're just working
yes,
as a sole proprietor.
But I don't think that you can open a business checking account without a DBA registered with the state. So when you go, you could open, I guess, a separate joint checking account or a separate personal checking account. But if you were interested in getting the benefits that go along with a business checking account, which varies by bank, they'd need to look you up in the state database.
So I feel like you just made a great point for DBA, which previously I wouldn't have considered if I were going to do this, because I'm not worried about somebody copying my name. But it's not just copying your name.
I don't know. Amy Wonka is a pretty sweet name.
It's a pretty sweet name. It's a pretty sweet name.
Can I say Wonka, Wonka, Wonka now?
Wonka, Wonka.
Are you going to make me edit that out?
No. So I feel like the piece that a DBA gives you is also the added layer of you are to some degree a business. You're more of a business than you are if you don't have it. Yes,
it is. It gives you no legal protection, but it may at least be you could say that it's documentation that you're separate from your business, but it doesn't.
Well, it's more than if you don't have it.
This is a great question for an attorney. My understanding is that it gives you no additional legal protection. That's the way it was explained to me.
Legal protection, but it does allow you to access things like a business checking account, potentially. Check with an attorney.
Yes.
We aren't.
Potentially, depending on the bank too, because every bank does this differently.
All right. Lots of variation.
So whether or not you incorporate also has implications for HIPAA regulations. So everybody knows what HIPAA is. If you don't know what HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that was instated in 1996, and it regulates the transmission of, and I quote, individually identifiable health information, including demographic data that relates to an individual's past, present, or future physical or mental health condition, provision of healthcare to the individual in the past, present, or future, et cetera, et cetera. You can find more about this on at www.hhs.gov. The link is on our website. You have to abide by HIPAA if you are considered a covered entity. So you are considered a covered entity if you bill electronically, if you use a clearinghouse for billing, or if you accept insurance. You have a question. What is it?
And I think that this is something that changed for speech language pathologists at some point in the not super distant past. So HIPAA was out in the 90s, but I feel like do you remember this? Maybe in like the mid 2000s, there was a lot of information on the Asha boards about they were somehow changing the way that it applied to speech pathologists. And maybe it was the inclusion of us as covered entities.
So I have a whole section here about Asha and Hipaa, and I don't remember the date that it changed, but I think
But there was a change, right?
Well, I think they always had strong recommendations about us adhering to HIPAA. I think my understanding is that what changed is our code of ethics.
Ah, okay.
So our code of ethics when did it change? It did change at some point I remember sometime in the last 5 years, I looked at it and then I looked at it again. I was like, oh, this looks different. But basically, if you are incorporated, you are considered a group. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter because as a speech pathologist, you should be adhering to HIPAA based on ASHA's recommendations.
Code of ethics.
Right.
Yep.
So even if you're not a covered, based on the law, so speech pathologist or no, you have to comply with HIPAA if you bill electronically, if you use a clearinghouse for billing, or if you accept insurance. If you're not in one of those buckets, ASHA still advises that you remain compliant with the law. And we have links to this directly. That we have a whole page. ASHA has a whole page about it, and there's a link to it on our website. It's in our Code of Ethics, Principle 1.0. Individuals shall protect the confidentiality and security of records of professional services provided, research and scholarly activities conducted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in our Code of Ethics, it says that you definitely need to adhere to protecting the health information of the people that you serve. There are some suggestions out there in terms of how to do this when you're in private practice. So keeping all identifiable information private. Back in the olden days, like Amy said, if you used pen and paper, you had to keep it behind at least one locked entry. But now with digital file storage, there's OneDrive for Business, there's Dropbox for Business. There is practice management software like Simple Practice is a really popular one for speech pathologists. There's WebPT, which is for PTs, but I know a handful of speech pathologists that use it. These are all HIPAA compliant ways to store your notes, your billing files, all of those kinds of things. This is another time to consider cyber insurance, which is $1,000 a year. So it's not cheap, and that's a ballpark number, but if you only have one client, it probably doesn't make any sense to purchase that additional layer of cyber insurance. Using a HIPAA compliant digital file storage system is probably fine. If you use an old-timey fax machine, which, believe it or not, health insurance companies are still using sometimes, you should consider using an online one at the very least. You need to password protect your computer. You should consider purchasing a domain name for your email use because Google and all these different free emails are not Google compliant. They have little software programs called spiders that go through your emails and read your emails and then have ads pop up on the side. So your patient information is not protected in a regular Gmail account. Google G Suite is HIPAA compliant and FERPA compliant, I believe. So that's another one now that I'm thinking of it.
But that's a thing you have to pay for. You have to pay extra
all of these things are additional money. So before you go into purchasing these things, that's another question for how many clients do you need to see to make all of these additional expenses worth it?
So how do you keep track of all of these different moving parts, right? So there's all of these expenses. You hope that you make money. Like when you're doing your planning, you mentioned a budget. What is that? Like,
I use a budget.
Look like?
We have a budget. So actually I was thinking about putting a budget up on our website for people to purchase for like the low price of $1.99 or something like that, because it's really hard. It's really hard to plan all of these things out. And I have a budget. I will make it available. It's basically a plug and go system where you plug in the number of clients you see, how much you charge, how much you're going to pay yourself, what your expenses are, and it spits out a monthly net value of how much you make per month, how much you can pay yourself at the end of the year, and all of that kind of stuff. But using Excel and planning some of these things out is really, I think, a cornerstone of good decision making when you're running a business and considering to go into private practice. I think it's, over the years, I've talked to a lot of speech pathologists, and I totally get it. We get really carried away with like, I'm going to make business cards and I'm going to make a website and I'm going to go on Instagram and hashtag, because this is going to be so great. And like, I get it. That's all wonderful. But you can only purchase the business cards if you have, are you laughing at me? Because I don't know how to use Instagram.
I thought it was funny. Your example.
Hashtag. But I'm such a dinosaur. I'm medium old. Just medium. God damn it. Oops, curse word. Sorry, my bad. So if you, what was I even saying? Oh, you get so excited about starting your business and investing in all of this stuff. But if you don't have income, you only have a business if you have a customer. You only have a business if you have a client. So it's great to like pay for ads on the Instagram, hashtag Instagram, or it's great, it's great to like spend a lot of money on business cards. And it's great to like, spend a lot of money on a website. But if you don't have any clients, then you really need to be very careful about how you're investing in your startup costs and all those kinds of things.
I would think too, it helps you to know how many clients you need to have.
Yeah.
How many clients do I need?
We'll get there. Because believe it or not, I'm not done talking about Hipaa because this is so boring and dry, but I'll go through it quickly. So consider a domain name, use a private email, purchase HIPAA compliant emailing and archiving, consider encryption capabilities when you're sending an email, consider locking and password protecting your documents. You have to provide your clients with a HIPAA privacy practice notice and then have them sign it. And you have to have a consent to release form. So if any of this feels really overwhelming to people who are listening, don't be overwhelmed. There is a handout where all of this is listed. It's basically a to-do list of things that you need to do to open a private practice. You can also email me. Like I said, I love to nerd out on this kind of thing. This is like my favorite area of mentorship because I just find it interesting. So there's also a chunk of documentation that you have to provide clients when you first bring them on to maintain HIPAA compliance. And I have a list of that on the handout as well. Just looking at the time, we have so many more fun, nerdy things to go over, and I want to get to them. Contracts and service agreements that have things like explain how your services are provided and the pricing. You have to explain your billing process. You have to explain how they're going to be billed. And you got to protect yourself. You have to tell them when you expect them to pay you. You have to tell them what's going to happen if they give you a bad check. You have to tell them how you're going to handle it when there's a non-payment on their account. So, we're all do-gooders. I think that's how we get into this field. And when you are treating someone who's fallen on hard times, what are your policies around what you expect in terms of payment? Or if you are accepting insurance and they haven't met their deductible, you have to have a lot of these things in writing. I have a lot of templates also that I would be happy to share. So please feel free to email me. There's a lot related to our ethical code in terms of consent to release that is really important to consider. Permission to video and photography, use photographs, hashtag Instagram, client history. I hate Instagram so much. Clinical documentation. There's a lot in our code of ethics about clinical documentation and how we keep our records. So that's principle IQ, or principle 1, not I, principle 1, item Q. There's a whole bit about that. You have to consider what your documentation is used for, where it's going to go, if you're sending it to parents and clients, parents or teachers, insurance companies. And there's actually a really great Asha article about documentation standards by Becky Sutherland Cornett. I don't think I said her name wrong, but the reference is on our website on the episode page. It's a slightly outdated article because the medical industry has changed so much in the last 15 years, but it still hits all the high notes. So it gives a nice outline of what the documentation standards are. Okay. I feel like I raced through that onto budgeting. Here we are. Back to budget. So coming back to Amy's question, I do have budgets that I would be happy to share. I will find a way to put them up on the website. We've already talked about some of this. You do not have a business unless you have customers. And it is really so hard, so easy to get carried away with like looking at rental space and daydreaming about, I don't know why I keep coming back to business cards. I was really excited to buy a business card for myself when I started this process. And you have to balance your expenses with your income. You have to make sure that you're making more than you're spending, because that is like basic practice.
Budget 101.
Budget 101. You have to know, you have to do the math. If I'm charging X number of dollars and I have room in my schedule to see 10 clients, how much money is that per year? How much do I need to make as a person to cover my rent and all of my personal expenses? Based on those two numbers, how much can I actually afford to spend on my business? I think people get a little excited about like, I'm going to use a home office and use my business money to buy toilet paper. Toilet paper is such a hot topic right now. So I think that's why I thought of that.
You can't even use your business to buy toilet paper.
Right, exactly. But we get really excited about these things, but it's really important to balance your income with your expenses. So I will make that budget available. And I think all of this goes into taxes. So this is the big, horrible, horrible situation of taxes, that death and taxes. Everybody has to pay them.
This is the second most scary thing. I feel like this is a big,
it is.
How do you
protect? And I think as long as you have to pay them, you're going to be okay. I think people get into trouble when they don't have their business money separate. They have, let's say they made $100 a week for a whole year and they just like cash the $100 and they tell themselves, I'm not really going to spend it all. And then they get this massive tax bill and they're like, WTF, where did this come from? Like, I knew I had to pay taxes, but I didn't know how much.
Well, because the taxes are different, right? So you
have an additional self-employment tax. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which is different.
So when you pay taxes, you pay your tax bracket plus 15% self-employment tax. That's a federal law. You can learn more about it on our website. On our website, there's a link to the irs.gov page that explains all of this. What I recommend generally that people do is, because you should be keeping your business funds separate anyway. You have your separate business checking account. You do your math. You talk to your accountant that says, okay, based on my tax bracket, for every $100 I make, I can pay myself X amount. I have to set aside 60%, 50%, 70%, 40%, whatever the percentage is for your tax bracket, plus this 15% self-employment tax. You set that aside and you let it sit in your business checking account, and you draw off of your business checking account and you pay yourself out of that account. You keep all that money separate. You can use those separate funds for business expenses. But when the tax man comes in April, or maybe you've chosen to pay quarterly, which is definitely something to talk to your accountant about so you don't get like a big scary bill, you have the money set aside and you have a good understanding of exactly how much you're going to owe. I think if you go into it with that education and just those basic fundamentals, it's really not that bad because you're prepared for it.
You make it sound not as scary, Kate.
It's not that scary. I do it every year. So if you're keeping your business funds separate, one other thing that you need to think about for a business checking account is that you need a tax ID, or it's also called an EIN, which stands for Employee Identification Number. You can apply for one of those easily. The link is again on our website. It is free. I'm pretty sure it's a .gov website, but I don't have it in front of me. And that way you can use your EIN or your tax ID number instead of your social security number, which is an additional separation between you as a human and your business. You pay yourself your allotted amount, and you can take, every time you invest in your business with your business funds out of your business checking account, you take them as a tax deduction. So this is where the tax deductions come in. And I know this also gets really confusing. You pay and this is, again, all information related to all of this information changes based on the corporate structure that you have. So if you were an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp, all of this information is different. I know personally from my experience being an LLC, it's pass-through taxes, which means I pay taxes as a person. I'm not going to explain this properly, but it's called pass-through taxes. Somebody could Google it. But you can take tax deductions. All of the expenses that you use for your business are tax deductible. So you get taxed differently based on what kind of incorporation you have. Based on what kind of legal entity you have.
So you file one set of taxes. You don't file a set of taxes
Yes.
as Kate and then a set of taxes as
See,
Kate's
you know
business.
so much.
I'm learning.
Exactly. In terms of, and so this is where I think, and I'm not sure if I said this earlier, but I would highly recommend, even if you're just a DBA, it is worth paying an accountant for 1 hour of their time. Go find an accountant, say you would like a consultation, pay them for 1 hour and learn everything you need to learn. And then you never have, if you don't want to hire them to do your books, you don't want to hire them to do your taxes, that's fine. I think it is worth the investment for a 1 hour quick education. That would, and an attorney too, if you can find an attorney that will give you a consultation, I think it's definitely worth the time and money.
And do you think that's the type of situation where you can just go in with a list of questions on a piece of paper and say, these are all the things that I need to learn about? Help me?
I think so, yeah. I think depending, if you go in with a super long list, they might charge you extra to sit in their office. But I think even a little bit of time with an accountant or an attorney is going to be really helpful. So moving on to other components of accounting that I think people don't really think about are administrative tasks. So, and this is again dependent on your volume. If you have 1 client or 10 clients, do you want to do your own books and do you want to do your own billing? So if you are billing for 10 people, that's a whole lot of time to make sure that all those bills go out at the end of every week or at the end of every month. And it's a lot of time. There are billing services out there that usually will take a small percentage of your income. And if you're seeing 20 clients, that might be worth it, depending. And again, this is the income and expense balance that you have to do.
Well, and having worked outpatient, do those billing services, do you know if they do the fun follow-up over and over and over again with the insurance companies that is sometimes required in order to get?
Sometimes. So a billing service will do private pay. An accountant will do private pay billing too. You just like have them batch out your bills at the end of the month. But a billing service, I do think really comes in handy when you start accepting insurance. If you start accepting insurance, so once upon a time, I had 15 clients. They were all on health insurance. I was by myself. I was a single practitioner. Each one of those clients had a different copay. Some of them had co-insurance. They each had a different deductible. And I had to submit a claim for every single visit. And every claim was a different amount. And I had to follow and track each individual patient client account and how much they owed me, how much they owed their insurance company, which ones I was sending a co-payment bill to, which ones I was sending like a full amount bill to because they hadn't paid their deductible. It is a massive, massive undertaking. I did it myself because I didn't want to pay for a billing service at the time. And I will never do that again. If I ever do a large volume of insurance clients, I would definitely hire a billing service. But it might not make sense to you if you don't want to pay for it or if you only have a smaller number of things. But point being, there are billing services out there that can be helpful. There's also bookkeeping services that can be really helpful. If you have to balance your checkbook every month, make sure that all the checks you wrote to Boardmaker or the state, make sure that they came out, make sure that all of the people that you charged, make sure all that money came in. Most accountants offer a bookkeeping service that can be a monthly charge as low as $50 a month, depending on who you use. I'm sure it can be a lot higher than that too, depending on who you use. You can also teach yourself how to use QuickBooks. I will admit that the first, month I used QuickBooks, I cried a lot. It's not a very user-friendly software. And I can remember a specific memory of like being on the phone with a customer service agent and being like, I just need to know how to bill my bill. And he was like, well, our goal is not for our customers to cry. So maybe I can help you. So it can be intimidating. There are a lot of tutorials online, so you can teach yourself how to use QuickBooks. I have done it. You can also pay an accountant to sit there and do it with you. You can pay an accountant to do it for you. There's a lot of different ways, but I would definitely recommend being serious about keeping your books because it's going to be incredibly helpful at tax time when you have an account, a record of all of your expenses, all of your tax deductions. You have to save your receipts, all of your home office expenses, all of those kinds of things. And that is accounting in a nutshell. I did want to talk a little bit about income because that's the reason why everybody goes into private practice. Now that we've covered all the scary things about legal issues and accounting issues, income is super important. You have basically three major options when it comes to generating income. You can go the private pay route. You can go private pay with insurance reimbursement, or as Asha calls them, super bills, and you can go through insurance. Private pay is pretty straightforward. I think one of the biggest questions that people ask me is, well, how much should I charge? And I think that is that varies by so many different variables. So,
well, and there are funny rules around like rate setting. Like it's one of those things where like you can't really talk to people about it. It's a funny.
So I have mixed feelings about this because I think most other industries who are selling products, they know what other companies are selling their products for because they just look them up online. There are more ethical restrictions and guidelines in terms of medical practice. I think most people know the range based on their geographical area. So geography is a huge component. So different areas of the world will charge in varying amounts. If you are a super experienced clinician with a specialty, you might be more comfortable charging at the top of that range versus a brand new clinician. Maybe you're only, maybe you're comfortable charging at the bottom of that range. I will say one piece of advice I will say is make sure you're charging what you're worth. I think that a lot of people in our field, this is going to sound sort of, I don't know how to put this delicately, but we are doing it a lot of times out of the joy of being clinicians. We enjoy being clinicians. We enjoy what we do. And I think it's really hard to say, well, it's really easy to say, I'm just going to charge you this like low amount because I really like your family and I really like this. I really like working with this student or client, and this is my passion. And I think that that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, you also have to run a business and you also have to charge what you're worth and make sure that you're protecting your interests. Don't gouge anybody. Don't be a jerk about it. Consider all of these factors objectively in terms of how many years of experience you have, what kinds of experiences you have, if you have a specialty, and what your geographic norms are.
And I think that's probably another place where the budget can really be helpful as well, because you're able to plug in, a couple of different, especially if you're running in Excel or Sheets or something like that, which is an active spreadsheet.
Right.
You can play around a little bit with the different places in the range and think about what that means for your business.
Yep, totally. I think it's great to say, I think I think we undervalue ourselves is maybe what I'm getting at. And I definitely recommend that people try and be as objective about it as possible. And a budget can definitely help with that. Maybe it feels good to you to charge on the lower end, but once you run the math with the things that you absolutely have to buy testing kits, you have to buy materials, you have to buy, a subscription to Boardmaker, all of that adds up. You might not be able to stay in business if you're charging on the lower end, or what you think is the lower end, but it's actually below the lower end. I think educating yourself that all that math is really important when you're trying to decide how much to charge. I get asked that all the time. There's no answer. There's no straightforward answer. But in terms of private pay, it's pretty straightforward. Private pay with insurance reimbursement is slightly more complicated, but not really. What this basically is you say to a client, I don't I am not contracted with insurance, but if you have a PPO or you have an insurance plan that allows you to see an out-of-network provider, I can provide you with a bill that has a specific amount of information on it. You can take that bill and submit it to your insurance company and get reimbursed for my services. So that way, the services are reimbursed, but you are not the one that's directly interacting with the insurance company. Asha calls this a super bill. There is a link on our site that describes exactly what a super bill is. Asha has free samples of super bills. You can make it look however you want. If you have a logo, you can put your logo on there. It's just your bill, but it has certain information that needs to be on there for insurance, which is sort of a nice segue into talking about insurance.
Quick question about the super bill. If you are providing that to your clients, and I don't know if it's something that you've ever done, but if you're providing that to your clients and then they have trouble, how much support do you provide in that process? Or is that something you figure out and define in your contract, like you were saying earlier?
That's a really good question. I would say that's something that you have to define in your contract.
Yeah. Okay.
I would be very, very wary of handholding because frankly, it's a time suck. And I think that we as clinicians, we want to do as much as we can for our clients, but going into an insurance hole is like a black hole. I mean, I would not go in there unless you are really, I don't know, you got time to burn. If you're sitting at home and you have nothing to do right now because of COVID-19 and you want to go into insurance hole, I support that choice. But it is a deep, deep, dark place. So I would definitely outline some of those parameters in your contract for sure. But in terms of what you have to put on a super bill, this is where we sort of get into some of the insurance lingo. There are some acronyms that you need to know. Don't get overwhelmed by the acronyms. All of it is in our handout. But each claim or each super bill, so when you submit a claim directly to insurance company or you put things on a super bill, it's the same information. You need an NPI, which stands for National Provider Identifier. The National Provider Identifier is given to you through the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability. The NPI is, and this is a quote, a unique identification number for covered health care providers. There is a link to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid on our website that explains exactly what this is. You get one through the National Plan and Provider Enumerator System website, NPPES. Again, don't be overwhelmed by the acronyms, but you go to their website, it's free. It's just like the tax ID. You go, you get the number, you forget about it forever. Most people who are working in an insurance provider setting already have one of these, so you may already have one. I would recommend you go to their website and look that up to see if you have one. If you are a single provider, you get a type 1 NPI. If you are a group or an LLC, you get a type 2 NPI. So that's another consideration when you're deciding whether or not to incorporate. If you are incorporating, you need to get a type 2 NPI number. CPT codes are another thing that you need to put on your super bill. CPT stands for Current Procedural Terminology. It's basically a string of numbers that says what treatment you did. So if you did speech and language therapy versus feeding therapy versus AAC therapy versus an evaluation versus an AAC evaluation, each one of these procedures, clinical procedures, has a different string of numbers attached to it called a CPT code. Asha has some great resources on CPT codes. And they have some great resources on the super bills, and there are CPT code templates up on the Asha website. Once you get a handle on the CPT codes and you know which ones go on your super bill, you also need to give each client something called an ICD-10, International Classification of Disease. Again, don't let your eyes glass over. All of these acronyms are on the handout and on our website, but the ICD-10 is basically a string of numbers that goes along with the diagnosis. So you're doing 92507 for somebody who has F43, which basically means, I'm not even sure what F43 is, but that basically means that you're doing a speech and language treatment with someone who has autism. Insurance doesn't make it easy. They're not going to use regular English with you. They need to do everything through like strings of numerical code.
Sounds horrible.
It's horrible. It's horrible. One client can have a lot of different ICD-10 codes, and Asha has a whole page dedicated to explaining this also. So definitely go on our website. There's links to all of this stuff up there.
This stuff changes too, right? So it's something you have to keep on top of. It's not like because the last time I billed was when we worked outpatient and it was ICD 9.
Yes, they
then.
just changed it. They just did a
So
whole revamping.
you learn it and then it changes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest question, another big question that I get is whether or not I should contract with insurance. There are some pros. One, you feel a lot more accessible to families. I think a lot of us in the field have a hard time taking people's money. It's an awkward exchange. We have this, great time spending, this great amount of therapy or this great time, with the student or the client providing the therapy. And then we come out of our session, we're like, that will be X number of dollars, please. It just has this very awkward transactional component to it. So a lot of people feel more comfortable accepting insurance. I feel like that is often I hear one of the pros. Well, I don't want to take people's money. I feel like they should be able to access their insurance.
Right.
Another really good thing is if you want volume, this is where you're going to get it. It is a lot easier to find people and clients for your business who want to take their insurance. It's a lot harder
All of
to
my
find
doctors
people.
take my insurance.
Yes, it's a lot harder for people. It's a lot harder to find clients who are willing to private pay. So if you are wanting volume, you want this to be your full-time gig, you want to hire people to do this with you or for you, then insurance is where it's at. I get a lot of questions about reimbursement rates. The reimbursement rates change and range per insurance provider. So if you're in network with Blue Cross is going to pay you a contracted rate. You could say, hey, Blue Cross, I charge $3,000 for one therapy visit. Blue Cross is going to be like, that's great for you. Here's the money that we said we would pay you. Go about your ways. And Harvard Pilgrim reimburses a different rate than Blue Cross. So you have different amounts of reimbursement across different insurance companies and across different regions in the country. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts probably has a different payout structure than Blue Cross Blue Shield of California. I have no idea. So it's definitely something that also changes state by state.
Can you do just some insurance? Do you have to do all the insurance? How does that work, right? Can you say, oh, I want to do this one insurance because they're a better reimbursement rate, or I already know people who have that insurance, so I'm motivated to get that insurance, so I'm able to see these clients who I have a relationship with?
That is something I feel like I know a lot about that in Massachusetts, but I think that changes in different parts of the country.
Okay.
So I think like around here, Blue Cross and Blue Shield is very widely used. They're well known for being one of the easier insurance carriers to contract with. I don't know that that's true in other places. I do know that, tracking all of those different reimbursements rates can be really, really tricky, which is sort of a nice segue into the cons of accepting insurance. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say,
you hear the elephants jumping around upstairs in my house?
I can hear
it's
upstairs.
Apologies,
It's cool.
Everyone. That's my son stuck inside. COVID-19 #COVID-19.
Yeah, jumping around. Jump around. So I also feel like this might be a place where I'm not a user of this listserv, but I am on a number of the Asha listservs for areas where I practice. And I wonder, I know they have a private practice listserv, so that might be something to check out too. If you have questions for your geographic, like if you live in Minnesota and you want to put a question out to the group, the Asha private practice listserv, all the SIGs could be helpful. There is a private practice SIG.
I think,
which I'm not a member of.
No, that's very, very helpful. I think it's sort of, there's a lot of things to think about when taking insurance. I think one of the biggest cons to insurance is that it is a royal pain in the butt. You enter into a massive amount of paperwork, contractual obligations, ethical obligations, that compared to private pay, there is no question that private pay is significantly more straightforward. It's just a lot easier to deal with. It is so much paperwork. It is so much keeping track of visits, keeping track of all of these additional things. Generally speaking, depending on what code you use, reimbursement rates are lower than private pay, but they're competitive in most geographical areas. And again, that's something that probably changes state to state. you have to keep track of so much. We covered this a little bit already, but who owes you a copay? Who owes you the co-insurance? Are they even eligible for your services? You have to call the insurance company beforehand and make sure that they have speech therapy coverage. Depending on the insurance, do they only cover disorders that are acquired versus developmental? A lot of insurance companies will say, oh, well, you can't see Johnny for a lisp because that's not a medical necessity.
Well, in a lot of insurance, I remember just from being outpatient, a lot of people have a limited number of visits for a year. You have to keep track of that, right? Like, have they gone
Oh my
over
God, they have
their
like 14 visits a year. And as soon as you're over 14
right?
visits, exactly.
Mhm.
You have to, I mean, even contracting with them is difficult. So in order to contract with an insurance company, you generally fill out their application. You have to get letters of reference. And then you usually have to go through a third-party credentialing service, a company called
What is
CEQH, which is the Council for Affordability Quality Health. And I'm pretty sure that link is going to be up on our website also. They are a third party, not even related to the health insurance company, that vets you. So they say, okay, Kate, I need to see your malpractice insurance. I need to see your licensure. I need to see your letters of reference. And CAQH, the third party, says, all right, Kate is an actual speech pathologist who is a real person who is covered and meets the standards for Blue Cross. So now we're going to say, Blue Cross, now you can contract with them. And you have to update your information with CAQH 4 or 5 times a year, every 12 weeks or something like that. So there's
Wowzers.
all of this additional administrative burden that comes with contracting with insurance. It takes about 3 months to get a contract up and going. And then you have to learn how to submit a claim. So you see little Johnny, and it's not just as easy as calling up Blue Cross and be like, oh, hey, my friend Joey at Blue Cross, I saw Johnny today. Please send me money. Thank you. That's not how it goes. You have to submit an electronic claim form with all of these different codes. And this is why people, I think, so often use billing services, because it's so difficult. And I think, just looking at the time and trying to wrap this up, at the end of the day, no matter how you get paid, if it's private pay, insurance, or a super bill, you have to get clients. So my closing statement, and this is my favorite little tagline, is that you have to be your own pimp. You have to pimp yourself out. One of the biggest questions I get is, how do I do that? You can make a website. You can pay for business cards if you want to. I would consider registering with Google Maps, something that you can do nearly for free, and you get a little pin drop. Somebody says speech therapy and they say, oh, there's a speech pathologist in my area. If you contract with insurance companies are going to be your biggest referral source, because patients go to the insurance page and they search for a speech pathologist.
Sure.
You could also consider meeting with pediatricians in the area if you're working, or hospitals if you're working with acquired disorders or adults. Go meet with the facilities, get on their referral list. So when someone comes in for an evaluation, or the pediatrician has flagged you for having a language delay, they hand you a reference list, a resource list to the family, and you're on it. So definitely making those calls, making those connections, networking in your community, telling people that you're seeing private practice, that you're seeing clients in a hospital. Those can all be really important things. And I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Kate, I feel like this was super helpful. I think that there are a lot of considerations around legal and how you incorporate and formalize your business, the accounting piece and the budgeting and how much that comes into play in this whole process. And then thinking about the choices you're making about your revenue streams that are coming in is just really makes it, I mean, I'm still
So
no.
like, no, thank you.
I feel like after this, I have a much better idea about kind of the big three buckets. I guess I like to think in buckets, but those are really the three big pieces that you would need to think about. And there are different questions that fall into each of those categories. And I also feel like knowing how to access professional resources and that they are important. I mean, I feel like, obviously, final disclaimer, neither of us are lawyers nor
Neither of
accountants.
us. But I'm happy to answer questions. I mean, if somebody, has questions and they want to get some advice about any of these things, please email me.
Yeah.
I really do enjoy talking about all of these kinds of things. I think that sort of wraps us up. Please don't forget to go to our website if you're interested in getting ASHA professional development. This is one CMH, one certification maintenance hour. Shameless plug for our next topics. Feeding and swallowing in the schools is coming up soon. Stress reduction is coming up soon. What else do we have?
Stress
in there?
reduction.
Partner training for augmentative alternative communication. We got some good stuff coming, so stay tuned. And thanks for listening.
We'll talk to you soon.